Let's talk about fallacies. So a fallacy is just an error in reasoning. That's it. It's that straightforward. Whenever somebody commits any kind of error in reasoning, they've committed a fallacy. That said, there are two major types of fallacies, and I'd like to dedicate this video to discussing both of them, though I will be paying special attention to formal fallacies. So let's go ahead and start there. A formal fallacy is an error in the form of an argument. Before proceeding, I would recommend watching my form and content video just to better understand what it is that I'm talking about. So, as I just said, a formal fallacy is just an error in reasoning found in the form of an argument. This is to say, something went wrong in the structure of that argument such that the premises do not guarantee the conclusion. Of course, we're talking about deductive reasoning here, and it just means that any invalid argument will be a formal fallacy, right? And vice versa. Any formal fallacy will just be an invalid argument. Now, some informal fallacies are really, really popular. And what I mean by that is, for whatever reason, humans are not the best at reasoning, or because sometimes, I don't know, maybe in the case of political debates, because the people who play into those debates are being intentionally deceitful, these fallacies just so happen to be committed a lot, right? So you'll find these two types of fallacies all over the place. I oftentimes find them if I'm reading an article, right, where people will make this kind of mistake. Now, before I give you the examples of these formal fallacies, it's worth noting that these popular formal fallacies that I'm going to talk about are actually just corrupted versions of generally good, valid arguments that are also extremely popular. So that's the best place to start. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put up here on the screen, I'm going to give an example of, or two examples of valid arguments that utilize forms that are extremely popular. So here they are. Let's go ahead. I'll just read them both and then we'll talk about what makes them good, right? So the first argument says, if it's raining, then it's cloudy. That's premise one. Premise two says it's raining. Conclusion, therefore it's cloudy. Now, you'll remember, when we're evaluating an argument for validity, whether the premises are true doesn't actually matter, right? What matters is just whether the premises guarantee the conclusion. And in this case, that's definitely true, right? If it's the case that if it's raining, then it's cloudy, and it's the case that it's raining, right? Assuming that those are the case, they don't actually have to be true, but assuming that they're true, the conclusion would absolutely follow. Just as well, for the second argument here, if it's raining, then it's cloudy. It's not cloudy, therefore it's not raining. That also follows, right? So both of these argumentative forms are very popular. In fact, they have their own names. The first is called modus ponens, and the second is called modus tollens. I agree, they're weird names. And I'm not going to delve into why they're called this. Suffice it to say that that's what's going on here. Or I should say rather, that's what these forms are called. Let's talk about what's going on here. So here is the actual form. So these are the forms of these arguments, right? And this form is the one that's called modus ponens, and this form is the one that's called modus tollens. If you look at the forms, it's pretty clear that it doesn't really matter what the content is. It's clear that the conclusion would follow from these premises, right? So obviously, like I've said before, you have to assume, just for the sake of argument, that the premises are true, just to make this an easier task. But if it's true that if A, then B, and it's true that A, well, I mean, we just said if A, then B, and A, so it must follow that B, right? Just as well, if you say if A, then B, and it turns out that not B, then it must be the case that not A. Very popular argumentative forms, that's why they have names. Now on to the formal fallacies. So, like I said, the fallacies are corruptions of these two popular argumentative forms. I don't mean to suggest that there aren't more. Like I said, all invalid arguments are going to be formal fallacies and vice versa. But these two are committed so frequently that they warrant recognition. And in fact, I think after you see this, you're going to start to find these all over the place. So first, let's just go ahead and start off with some, contentful examples. I'll read these out. We'll see that they're broken, and then we'll talk about what they're called and what the form is. So here they are. If I won, whatever it is, right? If I won, then I'm happy. I did not win, so I'm not happy. That doesn't follow, right? For instance, very often I'll go to some event or something like that. Maybe not that often, but we're all familiar with raffles. That happens all the time. I'm personally never really emotionally invested in raffles. I don't care that much if I win. If I do win, I may be happy, but failing to win doesn't really do anything to, dampen my mood or anything. I tend not to care, right? So notice, this is a fallacy. It's a formal fallacy. The premises being true would not at all guarantee the conclusion, right? The premises could both be true and the conclusion could fail to be true. It might turn out that it's false. In this particular case, if we're talking about raffles, in my case, it would absolutely be false. Here's a second, invalid argument. So if I won, then I'm happy. I'm happy, so I won. That one's pretty obviously invalid, right? I could be happy for all sorts of reasons. For instance, maybe I'm at an event where the event itself makes me happy. I don't win the raffle, but I'm still happy, right? So both of these arguments, they're both fallacies. They're both very common fallacies. They're so common that they have names. Unfortunately, their names are a little more annoying than just modus ponens and modus tollens, right? So I'll write them down and then I'll say something about that. So this is what's known as the fallacy of denying the antecedent. And this is known as the fallacy of affirming the consequent. I think it'd be nice if these had pithier names, but the nice thing about their names is that they're very descriptive. So the name is actually telling you exactly what's going on. Now I'm going to have a whole video dedicated to this, but for now, the antecedent of a conditional, right, is this first part. And the consequent of a conditional is this second part, right? So a conditional is just an if-then statement, right? And the first part of that if-then is called the antecedent, and the second part is called the consequent. So the fallacy of denying the antecedent is exactly what's going on in this second premise here, right? So the conditional says, if antecedent, I won, then consequent, I'm happy. The second premise is denying that antecedent. It's saying I did not win. And what makes it a fallacy is denying the antecedent doesn't let you conclude anything, right? So it's precisely a fallacy because you're not allowed to infer anything from the denial of the antecedent. Just as well in the second form, right? If I won, antecedent, then I'm happy, consequent, I'm happy, right? So this premise 2, is affirming the consequent. And once again, just as before, affirming the consequent does not let you conclude anything at all. You are not justified in drawing any conclusions from affirming the consequent of an if-then statement. Nothing will follow from it. And just to make these forms explicit, this says if A, then B, not A, so not B. And this one tells us if A, then B, B, so A. These are fallacies, right? They're formal fallacies. You will witness people reasoning like this a lot. When they do, we are not justified in believing their conclusions at all, right? At least not on the basis of that argument. You might have independent reason for believing a conclusion, but that argument gives you no reason whatsoever to believe that conclusion. And just to repeat myself again, because I think that repetition can be useful sometimes, all invalid arguments are formal fallacies. It's just that some of them are special because we run into them all the time. So that's enough about formal fallacies. I want to spend just like a minute talking about informal fallacies. Unlike formal fallacies, informal fallacies are errors in reasoning that involve the content of the argument. So it won't suffice to just look at the structure to know whether an informal fallacy has been committed. I'll give you an example. All right, so the slippery slope fallacy is a very, very, very popular fallacy. And here's what it might look like. If I forget my pen, then I'm going to fail my exam. If I fail my exam, then I'm going to fail my class. If I fail my class, then I'm not going to be able to make it through college. If I can't make it through college, then I won't be able to get a job. And if I can't get a job, then my whole life will explode. Therefore, if I forget my pen, then my whole life will explode. The form of this argument is perfectly valid. Right? It just says if A then B, if B then C, if C then D, if D then E, then, therefore, if A then whatever the last letter was that I used was, I think E, right? That follows. If those premises are true, then the conclusion would be true. However, one of those premises, or at least one of those premises, is going to be false, right? Somewhere, in fact, I would probably say all of those premises that I gave you were false, right? And the error, it's called a slippery slope because you go down this list of conditionals, each one more dubious than the last, right? To get to this really bizarre, striking conclusion. I see this on TV all the time, where people will say, oh, careful, that's a slippery slope. And I find that really weird because they're basically just calling themselves out for utilizing bad reasoning. Now, I actually should qualify that a little bit. The thing about informal fallacies is that they're really context sensitive. Sometimes you can reason through a long list of conditionals to a perfectly good conclusion, right? And the argument will be valid and the premises will all be true, and so it'll be sound. So not all long lists of conditionals, not all if then, if then, if then, are slippery slope fallacies. It depends on the content. I already have some videos on some informal fallacies, and I intend in the future to post more. I might even post some videos on the same subjects that I've covered before, just because I think that they need some, updating, because it's been a long time. And I want them to sort of like match this format. But anyway, that's all I really want to say about informal fallacies, because every single individual informal fallacy, and there are many of them that are named, deserves a lot of attention all on its own. So to wrap up, the purpose of this video was just to give you an overview of formal and informal fallacies with a special focus on formal fallacies. Remember, formal fallacies are just invalid arguments. Any invalid argument at all will be a formal fallacy. Informal fallacies, on the other hand, those are fallacies that have to do with the content of the argument, and whether one has been committed is going to be very context sensitive. So if you want to keep up with more of my videos, stick around.